Hi everyone, welcome to News Dabs for this week. I'm Jimmy Young, now reporting for the Pro Cannabis Media Group.
I'm Elizabeth Damron, reporting for ProCannabisMedia.com, and I'm up from New Orleans for Boston Cannabis Week.
In fact, you joined Dr. Marion McNabb and others for a 4-hour program at District Hall in the Seaport earlier this week. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, our panel talked about labs, testing, the procedures, and the regulations involved with all that.
Yeah, a lot of science went right over my head. It was quite a program. One of the highlights on another panel was social equity. There's a lot of people upset about the failed social equity program in Massachusetts. Now, at least there is some movement in the city of Boston with the opening of Pure Oasis, and their principal, Kobe Evans, also took part in a panel at that event.
Absolutely. We'll have some experts from some of the panels on our next We Talk Live with Kurt and Jimmy coming up in primetime on Thursday night this week from 8 to 10 on the ProCannabisMedia.com social media channels.
And we've got two great guests as well. We've got Roger Berkowitz from Legal Seafood coming in studio.
That's gonna be great.
And we'll have Bruce Linton, the former CEO of Canopy Growth, on the phone. Now, I can tell you this about what's happening in the nation's capital is pretty exciting. It looks like the House may finally vote on the Safe Banking Act. That would be the first step towards opening the banking industry to cannabis companies. Now, according to our friends at Marijuana Moment in Washington, D.C., the House of Representatives will vote on the opening of the banks to the cannabis industry even before the end of this month. Right now, that bill has 206 sponsors.
Exactly. So there is still some discussion on whether this vote will be taken on suspension or not. If the vote is taken on suspension, it means that 290 votes would be needed to pass this bill onto the Senate.
Once again, in Massachusetts, there are more fines and suspensions. MCR
Yikes.
Labs was fined $225,000 for their mishandling of inert cannabis earlier this year. They were using the back dumpster as a disposal site, and somehow investigators found out about that.
Well, and there was still some gray area about some of the regulations, and it is an unfortunate situation. But,
Right.
As far as unfortunate situations, let's talk about the vaping issues, because that's kind of a big thing right now. It's shaken up the cannabis industry and the e-cig industry. There have been hundreds of cases of a lung disease, including about a half dozen deaths. Reportedly, the common thread among the 6 deaths was that all victims had been vaping from illegal concentrates, going back to lack of regulations. One was tied to the flavors, and some were tied to the cutting agents or excipients in the concentrations in both the e-cig cartridges and the cannabis cartridges.
So Liz, you're a scientist. What's going on in these concentrates that people are having these horrible reactions to?
Well, that's an excellent question, and there's really 2 issues that need to be addressed. One is that the way that the lungs are designed, it's not designed to inhale oil. So you have issues where there is a chemical change within the vitamin E, but also just the fact that we kind of have a clog there. Okay? So now the other issue, which is a really, really big issue, and that touches the e-cig industry too, is the excipients or cutting agents that are being used. So there's also another chemical reaction involved with 2 of the cutting agents, that they're using, propylene glycol and polyethylene glycol. In a normal combustion cycle with these agents, those 2 chemicals will convert to carbon dioxide and water. If the combustion cycle is not completed, you have a conversion to formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is
basically poison. I remember that from dissecting frogs in
exactly.
science class.
And pig brains, right?
Yeah, and that was pretty much the extent of my science knowledge too, I might add.
So you see where we have a huge problem here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some of those products were not designed to be inhaled, and they got into these concentrates.
Exactly.
Anyway, all right. So the bottom line here is, so far in Massachusetts, the medicinal cannabis community has not had any cases of this lung disease.
No.
And most licensed labs use full spectrum terpenes to dilute that gooey concentrate. Now, there's one company in Western Mass called Mass Terpenes that is under investigation by the state of New York for its use of cutting agents, and that owner is cooperating with that state. Massachusetts is looking at a new regulation that would list all the ingredients in their concentrates. In the meantime, consumers and patients should be on the lookout for those 2 chemicals,
propylene glycol and polyethylene glycol.
I am so glad I didn't have to say that. Meanwhile, you'll be able to get legal cannabis delivered to your home starting next year in Massachusetts. But make sure you smile for the body cam. That's right. On every delivery person, they'll have a camera. The Cannabis Commission voted to add the body cam to all future deliveries, but limit the amount of time law enforcement will have access to those files to 30 days.
Well, this delivery regulation is really a good one because it's an opportunity also for social equity applicants, outdoor growers, veterans, minorities, and women to have their applications reviewed sooner than the general population.
Finally, some good news for them. Finally, today, a group of women legislators from Illinois have earned themselves a funny nickname during the first few months of their adult use rollout in that state.
Oh, this is great. An NPR story about their efforts called Representative Kelly Cassidy and her fellow female legislators, the Marijuana Moms. Well, believe it or not, they didn't like that too much. So they nicknamed themselves the Cannabitches. Might be a great name for a podcast. Hey, remember,
it's a whole new world of weed out there.
I'm Liz Damron.
And I'm Jimmy Young, and we leave you with some of the events upcoming at this week's Boston Cannabis Week.
Take care.
News Dabs is a weekly production of the Pro Cannabis Media Group. It is supported by Alternative Compassion Services in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. ACS is a leading provider of medicinal cannabis at 693 Elm Street in Bridgewater.